So right now at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, the United States is threatening to seize territory from one of its own allies. It's cutting off trade with another NATO member in real time on the floor of the summit itself. And multiple European leaders are publicly warning Washington to back off.
And at that exact same summit on the same day, Canada just became the backbone of NATO's entire early warning system, not by writing a bigger check, but by building something 11 allied nations needed and couldn't get anywhere else.
Now, we're going to walk you through exactly what happened today and why it's one of the most significant moments for Canada's defense reputation in decades. So let's get into it.
So here's the scene. Ankara, Turkey, yesterday. NATO leaders converging for what was supposed to be a summit about Ukraine, collective defense, and how the alliance moves forward in a more dangerous world.
And Trump walked in and almost immediately went after Spain. So much for a calm NATO summit, right? His exact words to reporters were this, and I'm quoting directly here: "Spain is a wasted cause. We don't want to do any trade business with Spain anymore." Then he turned to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and said, "At a NATO summit."
Yeah, this feud with Spain has been building for over a year. Spain refused to sign on to NATO's new 2035 defense spending targets. They also refused to let the U.S. use their military bases during the Iran campaign. Fair enough. And Trump has been furious ever since. But actually saying cut off all trade, including tourists at the summit itself, that crossed a line that even some American allies couldn't ignore. And they shouldn't.
No. And it wasn't just Spain either. No, he didn't stop there. Trump renewed his threats over Greenland, which belongs to Denmark, a NATO ally. Hello. He has been demanding that the United States take control of it forever now. At this summit, he pushed again. And Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen responded publicly and directly. Her words were this: "Denmark is ready to defend every inch of Greenland.
And we'll be right there with you." A NATO prime minister preparing to defend her territory against the President of the United States. That is the alliance that Canada walked into today. And that is the backdrop for what happened next.
Yep, right in the middle of that chaos, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stepped to the podium and made an announcement that most of the world is going to completely miss.
Yeah, NATO is replacing its aging surveillance aircraft. The old fleet, Boeing E-3 AWACS Cold War-era planes that have been the eyes of the alliance for decades, while NATO chose the SAAB GlobalEye as the replacement. The GlobalEye is built on a Bombardier Global 6500 executive jet, manufactured at Bombardier's plant in the Greater Toronto area.
Woohoo! 11 nations, including Canada, are joining together in a joint procurement. NATO will negotiate to buy up to 10 of these aircraft. The GlobalEye can detect drone swarms, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and it covers a dramatically wider surveillance area than its predecessor. And the airframe, the actual jet that it all flies on, comes off a production line in Ontario.
Now, Canada was already in negotiations to buy up to 6 GlobalEyes for its own Royal Canadian Air Force, and Prime Minister Carney announced that back in late May. SAAB beat out Boeing and the L3 Harris for that Canadian contract. Canada chose a Swedish system over American options, and that raised some eyebrows at the time.
But look at where we are now. 11 allied nations just followed Canada's lead. NATO itself is officially buying the same aircraft that Canada chose. So instead of being the country that went rogue on a procurement decision, Canada is the country that called it right first. Defense Minister David McGuinty was at the summit, and he said it indicates that there's an interest in a product that Canada is looking at building. That is Canada shaping what the alliance buys.
Canada has always shown up when our allies needed it. We have some of the best soldiers on Earth. But when it came to bureaucracy, Canada had a different reputation. Late with the money, slow with the equipment. We were a reliable ally, no doubt about it. But we were reluctant to lead.
So, The Carney government came in with a different vision this time. The pivot wasn't just, well, we'll spend more. It was, we'll build things the alliance needs, and we'll make sure that Canadian workers and Canadian companies are central to those contracts. That's a fundamentally different posture, and the GlobalEye deal is the proof point.
Canada didn't just buy off the shelf here. Canada entered negotiations that included Canadian production capability, engineering collaboration, and research and development components. Canada becomes a manufacturing partner in a NATO standard surveillance system. And now, 10 more planes bought collectively by the NATO alliance. They're going to be built around a Canadian airframe.
Yeah, Canada's aerospace sector just became load-bearing for the Western Alliance. That sentence would have been genuinely laughable 5 years ago.
Yeah. So let's put these two stories side by side, because on the same summit day, the United States is threatening to annex an ally's territory, cutting off trade with another ally, and being publicly called out by European heads of government. Meanwhile, 11 nations just agreed to build their next generation of surveillance aircraft on a Toronto jet.
And here's the part that really stings. Trump has been relentlessly pressuring NATO allies to buy American. Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon. He wants alliance contracts going to American companies. He said it repeatedly. Well, Canada said no. 11 nations followed Canada, and NATO's flagship procurement of the year now runs through Bombardier in Ontario.
Yeah, Trump didn't want NATO allies just spending more. He wanted everyone to spend more in America.
And Mark Rutte had to stand at that podium and announce that the alliance is choosing a non-American platform, while the American president was threatening allies in the same building. That is an extraordinary moment in NATO's history, and one I'm sure pained Rutte to make at the time. He is, after all, Trump's little sycophant. And most people, unfortunately, are going to completely miss all of this because of Trump's statements about Spain and Greenland. Those will be the ones that dominate the headlines.
He's always deflect. The more he loses, the more he threats. There's also a sovereignty dimension here that matters very much for Canada. The GlobalEye's primary mission for the Royal Canadian Air Force is Arctic surveillance. Canada has the longest Arctic coastline in the entire world. It has been a persistent vulnerability. It's been largely unmonitored and increasingly contested as Russia and China expand their Arctic presence.
Canada now has its own early warning system built by a partner that is not subject to U.S. export control decisions, monitoring Canadian airspace with Canadian and allied technology. That is a direct sovereignty win. And it happened because Canada made a strategic call that Washington didn't like and stuck with it.
Now, Greenland loops back into all of this because Greenland is not just symbolic. It sits at one of the most strategically critical points in the entire Arctic. Control of Greenland means control of the approach corridors between North America and Europe. And it's one of the most important pieces of real estate on the planet right now. Everyone knows that sitting in the summit room right now.
Yeah, Denmark definitely knows it. That's why Frederiksen was unequivocal. Denmark isn't being stubborn for the sake of it. A small country is making clear to the most powerful military in the world that its territory is not negotiable and not for sale. And the rest of NATO is standing behind her.
And just like Germany, Trump is really starting to spread himself a little thin. So I wouldn't go up against the NATO allies at this point, Donald.
Now, Canada has a direct stake in this, remember. A destabilized NATO, where American presidents threaten to seize allied territory, is a direct threat to Canadian security and sovereignty. Canada needs a cohesive alliance here, and Canada is now actively investing in building one on its own terms.
We've got the submarine deal, the GlobalEye, the defense bank proposal that 8 nations signed on, by the way, the Pacific trade strategy. These are not isolated decisions. Canada is systematically building the infrastructure of a new defense relationship, one where Canada is an indispensable partner, not a reluctant payer.
And the timing of today's Bombardier announcement, right in the middle of NATO's most chaotic summit in years, it's not a coincidence. Carney went to Ankara with a plan. While other leaders were managing Washington's behavior, Canada was announcing contracts.
3 months ago, Canada was still being lectured about defense spending. We were being called by Trump a free rider. We were told to do more. And today, 11 NATO nations just agreed to build their surveillance network around a jet that rolls off a production line in Toronto.
The alliance's eyes, the systems that detect incoming missiles, track drone swarms, and monitor the Arctic, are going to be Canadian jets. And that, my friends, is huge. It's a contract in writing being negotiated right now between NATO and SAAB with Bombardier at the center of it.
And while that was happening, Trump was threatening to cut off Spain and demanding Greenland. The comparison writes itself as usual. Because this is one of those moments where the road genuinely forks, I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, if NATO continues to fracture, if American behavior keeps pushing allies towards independent procurement, independent alliances, and independent security structures, where does Canada land in 10 years?
More sovereign, more central to a new alliance, or caught between a weakened NATO and an unpredictable neighbor to the south?
Let us know what you think in the comments, because this is important for Canada's future.
So if you've been watching this, make sure to subscribe because it really helps us out, and share it with someone to help boost the post.
And while you're at it, give it a like, give it a hype, and check out the pinned comment down below for all the fun stuff.
Thanks for watching, and we shall see you tomorrow, same time, same place.
Ciao for now.